Sadies, why are we talking about the beginning of slavery? What's up, Fortune fam? I'm Social Sadies with the Fortune Society, and you're tapped into the Fortune Chat. We at the Fortune Society are all about financial legacy, and we're committed to understanding the history that's shaped our nation's economy. We'll never fully understand the importance of financial legacy without first comprehending the impact that American slavery has had on our economy. So let's get into it. For nearly 200 years, the Portuguese dominated world trade with fleets equipped with weaponry and sailing technologies capable of sailing the high Atlantic seas. They used these fleets to explore the West African coast from 1415 into the 1600s. Although the African exports had an abundance of gold and ivory, the Portuguese left with over 175,000 enslaved Africans, establishing the slave trade between Europe, the New Americas, and West Africa. With the involvement of the Dutch and the English, the slave trade grew exponentially. In the New Americas, Europeans began to establish settlements on this already occupied land. They then divided the land into smaller units under their private ownership. This became known as the plantation system, starting in Virginia and expanding to the New England colonies. The natives had a very complicated relationship with the European settlers during the colonial period. They tried both diplomacy and warfare, but with the lack of unity between the tribes, the slave trade, the growing European population, and death caused by foreign diseases, the natives slowly lost control over their lands. With newly established cash crops and a non-existing workforce, these settlers were in need of laborers. Companies like the Virginia Company of London began marketing indentured servitude in Europe to attract workers to the new land. In 1607, the first group of indentured servants arrived on the Virginia coast. Upon arrival, they received food, clothing, and shelter, and were immediately put to work. In the grand year of 1619, 20 enslaved Africans were kidnapped from a Portuguese warship by an English nobleman and were brought to the coast of Virginia. Needless to say, those men were added to the workforce, and it didn't take long for plantation owners to join the slave trade and start purchasing slaves of their own. At this time, there were no slave laws in place, and racial boundaries were less distinct. Plantation life was harsh on both indentured servant and slave. What differed between the two groups was indentured servitude was a form of debt bondage. Once that debt was fulfilled, that man or woman would be free. And they were usually giving ownership over land and cattle. When African slaves were freed, they were only granted half freedom. It didn't come with any perks, and if they had children, their children were to remain slaves until they were old enough to start working and paying off their own slavery debts. As more enslaved Africans were brought to the colonies and fewer Europeans were signing up for indentured servitude, plantation owners really began to see the true value of owning a slave. A slave wasn't just free labor. A slave was something that you owned, a capital asset. Slave capital was not a term that was used in this time, but slave owners would record and calculate over a period of time in a slave's life to help create a system that would determine what years they would appreciate in value and what years they would depreciate in value. These were the building blocks for modern-day capitalism and the business practices that we see today. By the 1700s, colonial slave trading became the basis of an entire international economy. Business was getting so good that colony leaders began legalizing slavery, and they created laws that bound Africans to servitude regardless of their status. There were a variety of industries that used slave labor. It became an essential part of the expansion of American capitalism. Tobacco cash crops became this huge economic force, which caused the slave population to increase significantly in the 18th century. In 1705, Virginia declared a series of laws called slave codes, which were used to enforce social control. With the American colonies producing a massive amount of wealth with slave labor, colonists had to draft legislation to secure their property and wealth. At this point, millionaires were being made behind commercialized slavery. With all of this money being made, there needed to be a financial institution in place to secure it. In 1791, the Bank of the United States opened as a repository for federal funds. Its goals were to improve financial handling of American businesses, institute a common currency, stabilize and improve the nation's credit, and expand monetary power. There's no question about it. Slave labor laid the foundation for American capitalism. The truth is, you guys, the story about American wealth isn't hidden, but the details have been blurred. It's our job to gain clarity. In the next episode, I'll be discussing systemic slavery. We'll get into the 1800s to the 1900s, when slavery was embedded within the colonies, and how these laws had detrimental effects in regards to employment, ownership, and education. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, if you are digging my Fortuner hoodie and would like one of your own, send us an email with the answers to the following trivia question for your chance to win one. Good luck.